edition of Just Onside. I'm your host, Ayub Patel, a very tired host, and as you can see by the backdrop, I'm in France again, and it's been quite a hectic weekend for me. I was in London on Saturday, came back yesterday. I was in France the week before, so I'm doing it because I love the show. I love Ois as well. So I'm tired, but how are you, Ois?
Uh, I'm good, thank you. Are you? I mean, you've been some soldier getting on this Monday evening. You also had some weekend excursions out of town as well, so not easy, I must say, to fly back on Friday, fly back to France on Monday. Uh, do a 500-mile trip in between as well. So there's a lot to it, but I appreciate it. But after the weekend that we had, it felt right that we should do a show today. And obviously, Leeds winning over the weekend must have helped as well, Ayub. So
It
just
was
give you a little bit of
fantastic.
an energy boost.
It certainly was, and it was against Blackburn, the town that I live in. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to be in Blackburn to celebrate the win and rub noses in it. But excellent performance, excellent result. So I was a happy bunny. I mean, I got to London. I was actually watching the Liverpool game, but I was constantly checking the score, and obviously it was a double delight. Liverpool winning and my beloved Leeds winning. But let's start the show. Let's start the show with a team that we've sort of talked about quite often, or a man we've talked about quite often, Ten Hag. He's had a rather indifferent year. They've got some results, but they've obviously had some bad results as well. And they had a thumping loss at Old Trafford against Bournemouth. And there seems to be murmurings that maybe Ten Hag may not last till the end of the season. I mean, I've just actually read a quote from McTominay, and he's saying that the players are all behind him. It used to be toxic in the past, but all the players are behind him. Well, if they are, they're certainly not showing it on the pitch. What were your what's your take on Ten Hag and what's happening at Manchester United?
Uh, I think, unfortunately for Erik Ten Hag, we've approached the end game for Ten Hag at Manchester United Football Club. Yet you have to believe that's the case. As much as I'd probably would prefer that he's given time. It's just been such a lost season so far for Man United. I mean, we're not even at the halfway mark, right? Christmas normally resembles that kind of halfway stage of the season. But yeah, I do believe we're now nearing the end game, unfortunately. And it's normally, you can always sense the temperature in the room in terms of certain results, certain timings of results as well. That temperature has been rising for Erik Ten Hag for quite some time. I've spoken about it. I mean, if you remember, you've been the preview to the game at the weekend. I said they're a distinctly average team with a goal difference of zero, scoring 18, I think conceding 18, winning, losing, winning, losing. I spoke about how United-Chelsea game, at least in my eyes, was a game between two teams who were playing with very little pressure, and it was a case of you play, we play, and we'll see what score it is at the end of the game. There was nothing that was proven to me that day, and I guess on Saturday that kind of came back full circle and proved itself out. I've got to give you some credit. You suggested Big Dom Solanke would score twice, and he scored once, and he hit the post with another, leading the line very effectively. And I think you did predict Bournemouth to win, actually. So
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
although there's some takes that you have which I cannot get with, this was one of your finer moments, let's
It
say.
certainly was.
One of very few, I must say. But all good. No, good pick on your behalf. But yeah, I mean, look, I do believe this is now getting to the point where, unfortunately, it's difficult to see if you will make it to the end of the season. I have a strong hunch that if results don't go well next Monday, could be the inevitable. Yes, there's a lot of talk with obviously a change of ownership. Sir Jim Ratcliffe will be coming in, taking over some of the sporting kind of decisions and what have you. And of course, he'll have his take. I just think there are certain situations that come about, especially in terms of certain games, certain weeks, certain significant moments of the season. And I think this week resembles as such, right? You've got a home to Bournemouth. With every kind of difficult situation comes opportunity. And if they'd beaten Bournemouth, Arsenal obviously drop points. You close the gap a little bit more on those above you somewhat. But a really tepid performance. Bournemouth deservedly winning. Had a goal disallowed at the end as well. Could have been even worse. I mean, really poor defending. And I kept saying whilst I was watching the Chelsea game, I mean, if it's last ditch clearances and 2 against 1s and 4 against 2s. So, I mean, that's just not going to cut it. That's just not a steady diet. And Bournemouth, who have been in good form themselves, big kudos to the manager under huge pressure early on. Bournemouth held their nerve and now really bearing the fruits of some kind of stability and chemistry. And yeah, very well deserved win at Old Trafford. Could have been a few more as well. I just think with the games that are to come, Ayub, with tomorrow night's big game at home to Bayern Munich, you have to feel, although Bayern Munich also had a difficult result over the weekend, you just have to think tomorrow will probably signify Manchester United's last game in Champions League participation for this year. And obviously they also need assistance from the other game. And then you've got the hugely difficult away game at Anfield next Sunday. I do believe that if those two results, and I guess a lot depends on the manner of the performances and maybe the manner of the defeats. I think this could well be the last week Erik ten Hag's manager of Manchester United. And I mean, Gary Neville spoke about the fact that he doesn't feel that that should be the case. And to be fair, there's a part of me that believes that shouldn't be the case as well. But I think what you're seeing is a manager who right now has made some tough decisions, but who's also perhaps not helped himself. Of course, there's a few issues clearly within the squad. You've spoken about it at length. Jadon Sancho, you had the kind of Greenwood situation. Varane's not playing at the moment. What's going on there? He's not even making the squad. Sometimes there's some clear issues there. But yeah, even some of the signings he's made have just simply not come to the fore. It's more the fact some of the players that he wanted to get rid of that have really been more star players this season. I mean, it's a mess. At Manchester United, you cannot have you cannot have lost seasons. I keep using that phrase, and it's been a lost season. They're not going anywhere fast. They've been very fortunate to pick up the wins that they have, the majority of which I think maybe Chelsea arguably was their best offensive performance for the season. But they've been poor for the most part. We're now entering the festive period at Christmas. So yeah, I struggle to see him surviving this week. I really do. I think normally Manchester United, if you look at the history, it's often come to the point where they're not necessarily proactive in terms of moving on managers, but they are normally very reactive. I think right now, from an approval rating for Ten Hag, I'd say it's probably still 50-50. I think some fans probably still want him to see it through. They don't want to be perceived as a club that simply just moves on managers. But there's something about that club. You've spoken about it before. I think you've been maybe tougher than I have in terms of something rotten at its core. I think there's just something right now where it swallows certain managers and swallows certain players in terms of them not being able to put forth their best performances. It's just something about it. Whether it takes a certain strength of personality with management just to really galvanize the club. Clearly, that's not been the case for many a year since Alex Ferguson left, which is over a decade ago. So I find it very difficult to see him surviving. I think they will fall short tomorrow. It's just hard to see how they come through. They need some luck, and it's very difficult to see them overturning or getting a positive result at Anfield. Not saying it's impossible, but it's difficult to see. And then therein comes then the situation about you've got to evaluate the performance. Is there anything there that suggests the players are still fighting and scrapping? Right now, it seems a little bit of a divided camp. There's a lot of noises. There's a lot of unrest. You've got the whole kind of Martial starting up front instead of Højlund. That's creating some issues, especially on the terraces. But yeah, it's not going well. And there's nothing to suggest that this will be arrested anytime soon. Some of these players are good players, yet suddenly can't seem to find any type of form this season. It's not a well-knitted team. They're not a cohesive team. It's a team that looks like they could concede plenty home and away. If you remember the Everton first half, Everton were absolutely dominant, should have scored maybe 3, maybe 4. So that was another game where Man United, second half, they were much better, but that was another game where they could have lost. So in the end, I think the end is nigh. I think if results go the way I think they will, I would be very surprised if he's still manager of Manchester United Football Club come Monday night, next Monday.
He's hanging on by the skin of his teeth. It's a tough one. I mean, I've thought about this, and getting rid of Ten Hag, I don't think solves the problem. That's the problem, because he is, I don't think, the major problem. I think he's part of the problem, because I think his management style has been poor. I think his personnel management has been horrific. I mean, we talked about David De Gea, but it's not just David De Gea. Mason Greenwood, that unpleasant incident where he was going to come back into the squad, and then obviously it was based on the media, the pressure, and then they decided, well, maybe we'll bow to the pressure. Sancho as well. It's just even the Ronaldo fiasco, because it just seems that I'm not sure exactly what type of man manager he is, but he doesn't come across as somebody who's very good, who's very efficient, who's very effective. I mean, Alex Ferguson, in a sense, you're always in the shadow of Alex Ferguson, and it's difficult. And I think that's where the problem for me started. I think, and I partly blame Alex Ferguson as well. I mean, it's a difficult thing to sort of say, but he was such a powerful character that really he ran the football club for the best part of 30 years. The succession plan, he should have been instrumental in the succession plan, which he was in appointing David Moyes, which I thought was a massive mistake. It should have never have been David Moyes, but he should have stayed on in a maybe a director of football role for about 3 or 4 years, just to make sure that the club, there's a smooth transition. But I think when he picked David Moyes, that was catastrophic. I think from there, problems have continued. I think there's issues at board level. I think the players as well. I mean, at the moment, I've absolutely no idea what sort of mindset the players are at. They've stumbled and stuttered through the season. I mean, I sort of pick on Rashford for a reason, because he should be now, I mean, he's still a young man, but he should be the elder statesman. He's been at Manchester United for a long, long time. So he should be now almost saying, right, I'm going to be one of the leaders of this football club, because he knows exactly what Manchester United means. He's been there since he's 11, 12. So he's a Manchester United supporter. So he should be somebody that should be instrumental in taking United out of this abyss. So I hold him hugely accountable. I think his attitude stinks. Certainly when he's on the pitch, there's, as I said before, he's become show business. He's a celebrity. He's not a footballer. He's a celebrity who plays football now. And I think there's so many things wrong at Manchester United that the easy thing would be to sack Ten Hag. But that's not solving the problem at all, because in a sense, all you're doing is creating an opportunity for somebody else to come to pick up the same problems.
The only the reason is, I mean, there's a couple of points I just want to make very quickly. One is Erik ten Hag fully to blame? And you rightly say he's not, because ultimately there's a lot of other issues. But the problem is they're all kind of interconnected, and I'll explain. If you've obviously not got a director of football and you don't have a proper kind of top to bottom setup, an organization that's set up for success, you are going to have some weaknesses somewhere down the road, whether it's recruitment, whatever it may be, contract extensions, where United have also suffered. And there, what you've got is Erik ten Hag's been kind of master of kind of all signings and what have you. And if you're gonna give him that type of responsibility, which is not something he necessarily had at Ajax, where they've got a more kind of traditional setup, or more, let's call it a European type setup, you're then going to be left at the mercy of that manager making more good decisions than bad, right? And you talked about Sir Alex Ferguson. Now, Sir Alex Ferguson, you're right, ruled everything top to bottom, and he had a few rickets along the way. Probably one of the worst ones being the sale of Yap Stam, after, obviously, let's call it a personal fallout. Now, that was definitely a mistake, but when you're winning and when you're succeeding and when you're that type of patriarch of the full football club and everybody listens to you and you're winning games, and it comes back to that, you're going to get away with a lot more, right? And that was what Sir Alex Ferguson prided himself on across the course of 2+ decades. And for the most part, he was immensely successful, the most successful manager in my lifetime. So I think when the going's good, you're going to get away with some stuff. And Erik ten Hag, if you remember, he's made some big, bold decisions early on. And because he had a fairly relatively successful first season, for the most part, he built some equity with the club. And even the Ronaldo fallout was nowhere near as severe as it would have been, perhaps, if it was a manager who was struggling. Chances are he's not making the same decision if he's struggling. He only did it from a position of power. The problem you've got is when you've not got the proper setup, you're at the mercy of that manager making more good decisions than bad. And then when he's then engaging and buying players that he's A, worked with, or B, familiar with, because they've got some experience in the Dutch league, you then have to hold him accountable to some extent, but you also have to hold those accountable that have given him that power, right? That given him that responsibility to make those decisions. I mean, many of his signings have simply not worked out. Now, if he's responsible for that, he has to share some of the blame. You can have a macro argument whether or not that setup is correct, and that's a different conversation altogether. So, have they set him up for success? Probably not, but he also has to bear some responsibility. And I think the final thing I would say is I agree with you that the manager is perhaps it's not going to solve all the issues. Of course not. I don't expect Manchester United to part ways with Ten Hag and then all of a sudden they're going to reel off 18 wins in a row, or 10 wins on the bounce, or whatever it might be, suddenly an upturn in performance. But I just wonder this. I always think about things like, well, we spoke about De Zerbi at Brighton. It'll be interesting on Sunday because Brighton play Arsenal just before Liverpool play Manchester United. I wonder whether that'll be seen as an audition. Brighton have historically done well at Arsenal. Yes, they've had a few hiccups recently, but he's clearly a manager that has caught the eye of many of the European elites. And I just wonder whether or not, even though you might not want to make that decision right now, you might be thinking this is perhaps an option because this manager may well not be available come the summertime. Now, uh, when Manchester United come calling, I think most managers in the world will listen. So I'm not saying he won't be available in the summer, but I wouldn't be surprised if they looked at kind of surveyed the land and how the land lies and thought to himself, if he gets a positive result at the Emirates, I can see how the headlines could be spun. A lot of United fans might be clamoring, saying, "Oh, there's a manager at Brighton that's incredible, and we need a bit of that football at our club." That kind of. And he's very assertive and he's very kind of, sure of himself. I just wonder whether or not there'll be some of that at play on Sunday. Like I said, it's the game prior to the Anfield game, the blockbuster. I worry for Ten Hag if tomorrow doesn't go well and Sunday doesn't go well. I just wonder whether that feeling within fan sentiment will be swayed to the point where the majority are saying he's just going to have to go because there's still an opportunity for us to rescue something this season, be it fourth spot, whatever it might be in terms of the height of their ambition. So you're right, it doesn't solve anything perhaps in the long term or whatever, we'll have to wait and see. But I just wonder, how kind of owners think and new owners, they want Champions League football and they want the club going somewhere. Are they willing to just simply concede this season to say it's a lost season? I wonder. I question that, or do they see this as we're still not that far away from the fourth spot, and if we can rejuvenate the squad and galvanize the club, there's still something to be rescued in the second half of the season. So uh, I'm kind of on the fence, but I do think if the two games don't go well, I think it's more likely than not that he won't see Monday, or he won't see the end of Monday as Manchester United manager.
I think you're probably right. I think it is an important few days for Ten Hag. And ultimately, I suppose it's a results business. If he gets decent results, maybe there's a stay of execution. But really, there are serious fundamental issues at Manchester United as to how they're going to be resolved and who's going to start the process. I think a lot of the players need to be moved on. I think there is a stench with some of the players that are at the club. And maybe that's the first thing to do. Just get rid of some of the players. And if you're going to have a season that's wasted, might as well make sure that you do the most effective thing. I think there's too many players. I think Rashford needs to be moved on. I honestly do. I think he's a player that disappoints me greatly. I just think he's a player that football is not the most important thing in his life. And if you're playing at Manchester United, maybe you can have that, but at least show it on the pitch. But he's not even showing it on the pitch now. I think he's making it just too obvious that football isn't that important. And as I said, I'm bitterly disappointed with him because of all players, he should be much more in tune with what Manchester United is all about. Unfortunately, he's one of the most poorly performing players from the group that are performing reasonably average. So that's Man United. That's a manager under pressure. Oh, you
I
look
was
as if you've got another thing to say. Go on.
No, I was just wondering if you want to just share a few quick thoughts on Bournemouth. It was a huge win for them, right? And they've been in some great form. I know it's a manager that you're obviously quite fond of. He could have been your manager as of now if things had transpired a certain way for Leeds United Football Club. But they're on great form, aren't they? 4 wins and a draw in their last five, and they are 10 points clear of the relegation zone. So maybe just a couple of comments from yourself. I mean, they are playing with a little bit of confidence now, and to keep a clean sheet at Old Trafford, that takes some doing. So, what do you think?
It was something that some of the Bournemouth fans, if you read the forums, the Bournemouth fans were saying it. Maybe not the first 2 or 3 weeks, but certainly as the weeks were progressing. They weren't getting the results, but they could see a pattern of play developing. They could see Iriola's ideas finally sort of being absorbed by the players. So again, that's always a good sign because there was a plan, there was a process. He was put it into action. And a lot of the fans were saying it's only a matter of time before it clicks. And that's exactly what's happened. So again, Bournemouth, congratulations and fair play to them. They picked a manager who obviously now I think is playing a brand of football, which will take them. I think the next level for a side like Bournemouth is mid-table security rather than flirting with danger. So I think they made the right choice.
All right, yeah, here we go. Here we go. I should add that they are just behind Wolves, but anyway, just out of interest. But no, listen, good on him, and they're definitely coming together, aren't they, in terms of performance? And I think he's got the right setup, and credit to Bournemouth for holding their nerve. I mean, it's hard to see them being a part of the relegation trouble now. 10 points is plenty. I would say even at this stage. So yeah, no, good on them and a huge result, fantastic result, and they go from strength to strength.
Well, Iriola, he's a manager who's on the up, but another manager who's under pressure. I mean, he came with a big reputation. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, he's a decent manager, but Poch, he's won hardly anything in a league of substance. So in England, he won hardly anything, if nothing at all. I don't think he won anything at all, did he, at Spurs? At PSG, that doesn't count. Nobody counts that. He came here and Chelsea have invested hugely. They got some big players, but they're absolutely just all over the place at this moment in time. They've had good games, they've had some average games, and a very, very disappointing performance at the weekend. So again, what's your thoughts on Chelsea, the way they're playing? What's your thought on Poch? Is he a manager under pressure?
He's under pressure. I mean, he's under pressure. You remember my previous comments on this, Ayub, was that there's no way that Chelsea should entertain anything other than Pochettino being given at least this season and well into next season. Now, that is from an objective standpoint. I'm not stupid. I do know which club he's managing as well. So there's that to kind of factor in. Yeah, poor performance against Everton. They've got the same goal difference as Everton as well, 0. So they're a distinctly average team. Yes, there might be a number of spots between them in the league table, but Chelsea have 19 points, Everton have 13, which means that Everton would be above them had it not been for the 10-point deduction. They would have been above them by 4 points. I mean, credit to Everton, they've galvanized themselves after that difficult kind of setback with the 10-point deduction. From a Chelsea perspective, Ayub, I think there's a huge amount of pressure for sure. I jokingly told you that I did bump into your Chelsea supporting lad who told me, "Don't you dare speak to me about patience." And that was before the weekend's results. So I've given him a wide berth since. Let me tell you. But no, look, I would be worried. If I'd be Pochettino. There was some talk, if you remember, just going into the game, there was some talk about Days being. He slightly changed his tone towards some of his players, clearly trying to get some reaction out of them. It's a team. I mean, it's not always about spending money. You've got to spend money on the right players, create a chemistry, a cohesion, and what have you. And that sometimes does take time, irrespective of how talented the players are. You'd hope that the talent would mean that transition period is relatively smooth and efficient and short, right? You'd rather have talent in your dressing room than not, with a view to getting results. But that's now they lost at Old Trafford, which clearly isn't. It isn't the most difficult place to go to right now, as evidenced by Bournemouth. But they deservedly lost, I thought, at Old Trafford, and then to lose at the weekend to an Everton team. Again, few opportunities, plenty of chances, but still not being able to score. And look, they've been a bit unfortunate with Nkunku's injury. He's not obviously played any part this season. They bought him to lead the line. Nicholas Jackson has been hit and miss. Again, it's his first season in the Premier League, so we've got to be fair to him. But there's a lot of creativity, that midfield between Caicedo and Fernandes, all of about 220 million worth. Again, still not functioning to the level that you'd expect. I mean, Caicedo, no real excuses for him. He's got Premiership experience now. He clamoured for that move. You could imagine what he'd be like in a well-functioning Liverpool team right now. I mean, Liverpool still have got a few issues, but you could see Caicedo really giving them a fillip in terms of heading into the title race. But these are difficult times for Chelsea. He made a few changes going into this game. Again, the games are coming thick and fast. I'm not reading too much into it, but I think Thiago Silva was dropped, Sterling was dropped, or rotated, should we say? But again, similar struggles. James going off injured with an injury. I mean, Reece James is always going off with an injury. I was surprised they made him captain. I'm not saying that these injuries are his doing, of course not, but there's something to be said about a player who's constantly going down with injury. Is there something wrong with his approach, with his fitness, with his kind of training? What is it? He keeps getting these kind of muscular issues, yet he's been rewarded with handsome contracts and extensions and been given the kind of keys to the team, right? Being made captain and what have you. So, look, I just don't know what is going on there at Chelsea Football Club. I knew the first season would be a challenge. I did not expect them to get top four. Um, uh, to be fair, I thought they'd be, yeah, probably sixth, seventh, maybe eighth at best, but right now they're 12th, and they've now been in this position for more than a season now, in terms of this kind of mid-table mediocrity, arguably just below average, to be fair. So these are worrying times. I cannot imagine. I think the minimum expectation of you on Maurizio Pochettino this season would have been you need to get us into the Champions League. And if you fall just short, I think you could argue there might be some mitigating circumstances, and you might say, look, there's some progress there. We went on a run at the end of the season. We're showing some real progress. We just fell a little short. There's something to kind of hold on to. I think right now Maurizio Pochettino is treading a very dangerous path right now. I'm not saying it's his fault. It's just Chelsea Football Club is the most unforgiving club, probably along with one or two kind of superstar clubs. And I would worry for him. I don't think he deserves to be fired. I think he deserves time. I think even if this season's a bit of a lost season, I still believe they need to give him time. But I really do worry. There's no real consistent signs of progress, and that's the key, consistency. They're a mid-table team at best, and given the talent that's available to them in terms of World Cup winners and £100 million players and big names everywhere, that is a shambles, to be honest with you. So it'll be interesting to see how Chelsea approach this. I think they're trying to get away from that moniker of being that club again, that Mickey Mouse club. They had the issue with kind of removing Graham Potter and what have you, but I think they do want to settle into being a more professionally run club. But this is a results business, and they do have a tendency to make kind of hasty decisions. And I just wonder whether or not, if it's clear for them, similar to United, where we're not meeting our aims and objectives this season, do they A, give up on the season, in which case you might as well give Poch the time and the kind of empower him to build a squad and get rid of whoever he wants, essentially? Or do they think, is this guy, to your point, is he as good as actually advertised? Because he should be getting more of a tune out of these players than he is currently. And look, I don't want to hear Manchester United fans say they should be more focused on Chelsea, and Chelsea fans saying they should be more focused on Man United. Ultimately, they are two elite clubs in terms of on the world stage, and clearly both not kind of getting up to their relevant standards. Do I expect anything to happen to Poch this season? I don't. I genuinely don't. I do think they'll see it through, but I think it looks like they're going to finish seventh or eighth at best, and that's if they get a wriggle on. So yeah, I agree. I think he's under pressure, and I think with these clubs, just finally, Ayub, I always think it's where United have been a little fortunate this season is they've won a game, lost a game, won a game, lost a game. So that it's kind of been bouncing from kind of a distinct lack of hope and being demoralized to, oh right, okay, we got a win. Let's see if we can get back-to-back wins. And it's been that kind of season where you've just kind of been strung from one emotion to the other. And I guess Chelsea, to some extent, been the same. I think if they're at the point where probably their lowest point, both clubs this season, where I think if they now were to get a couple of back-to-back difficult results, I think that will change the mood and the tone of the fans mainly. I think against the manager. How do you see it? Do you think he's still got a fairly strong approval rating? Are you within the Chelsea fraternity? Obviously, you speak to your lad. What's your view? Do you think he is under pressure?
Well, after losses, I tend not to speak to my lad because so I'm not exactly sure what his thoughts are now. I just think that Chelsea is a football club. When you invest as they have, it's not for long-term success. It's for immediate success, and immediate success is, at least you sort of mentioned it in your comments. A top four, absolutely. That is the bare minimum expectation, that with the amount of money that Chelsea have spent, that really Poch should be in the top four. At least that's sort of what my thoughts on that are. He's seriously underperformed, and the reason why I say he's underperformed is because I think they played Liverpool. Was it the first game of the season?
One of the first games
Yeah,
early on.
it
Yeah,
was
it was the
one.
first game of the season.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it
yes.
was 1-1, and they were really tidy. I was really, really impressed with Chelsea. They looked, it, it,
You said
it
they were back.
yeah, I did, and there was a reason why. I thought they've got good players, and good players invariably don't need much time to settle in, because that's the reason why they're good players. And I thought that's a really impressive start, albeit it's 1-1, but it was certainly, I mean, if there's such a thing, it was a winning 1-1 draw. I thought they were much the better side. And I thought, well, if they're playing like this now, things can only get better. Uh, I just sort of think Poch is one of those managers who is overrated. He's had success at PSG, but again, this is where I'm always slightly skeptical. I want to see a manager prove themselves in the top leagues, in the best leagues. He was at Spurs for 5 years, never won anything. He should have at least. I mean, in that 5 years, he should have won something, which told me something, that he's not a winner. When you're managing Chelsea with the amount of money they've spent, I was just thinking, I'm not sure whether this is the right fit for Pochettino. I don't think he's a manager that has got the credentials to be successful at Chelsea Football Club. I just don't buy into this. Well, we've got to give him a year. No, absolutely not. You don't spend that sort of money. Caicedo, you actually said he's a proven Premier League player, and I think this is probably the worst that I've seen him play. He may have odd moments, but he's a much better player than what he's showing at this moment in time. Sterling has been pretty good this season. But it just is, he's got an array of riches. But whether it's his tactics, whether his team selections, he should be doing much better. They should not be in the position that they're in. And I hold Pochettino accountable, because at Manchester United, there's all sorts of issues at board level. Whereas Pochettino has a team or a squad of players that really he should be bare minimum in the top four. The fact he's not in the top four, to me, is a damning indictment on his managerial abilities, his coaching abilities. And I would sort of say that really, if they should be saying, if by January we're not in the top four, or we're not sort of near the top four, then maybe we need to look for somebody else, because the players are there. And if you're not capable of making the squad that we have perform to a level where we're top four, then maybe we need to look for somebody else.
Yeah, listen, I do think he needs to be given a year. That's why I do disagree with you there. I think the same. You've got to give managers some time, because you're not going to get your ideas across from day one. Look, I'm as skeptical as you are in terms of Poch, because it is what have you done for me lately type of scenario, right? I need to see it. Yeah, I see better than I hear. And ultimately, I need to see something consistently on the pitch where I'm like, yeah, understand clearly what they're trying to do, what they're trying to achieve. Again, I support a club where I see that, right? Irrespective of the weekend's results. Now, with Pochettino, with Chelsea, where I think you've got to be careful. I mean, he's spoken about being given some funds in January, which I thought was a little bit cheeky, but okay, I mean, it is what it is. You on the one hand, Chelsea have had immense success over the years, having great managers at the helm, Ancelotti, kind of Conte, Mourinho, just to name a few, where they've bought big players, right? They bought big players, big money being spent. Abramovich backed them to the hilt, right? And they won a lot of trophies, again, under different managers and what have you. Now, they've also spent money under kind of Lampard, Potter, Tuchel, and now I didn't mention them in chronological order, but now under kind of Pochettino. So it's kind of two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. This is how Chelsea operate. Now, you might say, oh, some of the recruitment's been rubbish, but then that's the way Chelsea always operate. Who's the player? Who's available? We'll spend what we need to spend on him. Right now, what they've got, I think, is some players where they really want to establish themselves into the team. So what I mean is Fernandes, Caicedo, Mudryk, Sterling, even Jackson to some extent, really kind of settle them down. But then they've also got other issues where they're not quite sure, whether it's at the back where Thiago Silva's still playing a part even at his advanced stage, but they're having to play Cucurella kind of on the right-hand side because James is always injured. I think Gusto's also injured, I believe. So they're playing or out of favour, but they're playing Cucurella there. He's not a player that I don't think the Chelsea fans have taken to well. Chilwell's always injured. I used to have this conversation with your lad all the time. If you keep rewarding players and you're not giving them an incentive to kind of show their worth, James and Chilwell are on huge money. They can't get through a season being available. They pick up at least one serious injury a season. And you might say, well, what's the alternative? Sell them. I'm just saying I wouldn't be rewarding them with contracts left and right. That's the one thing I wouldn't be doing. I'd be telling them to earn their way and running a tight ship. So look, in the end, I think they've got this issue. Even the goalkeeper at the back, are you right? He's not quite sure. He's made a few mistakes. You remember the famous Declan Rice goal at Stamford Bridge. He's not sure of himself. So there's some spots in the team where I think they've got some, or they want to build some consistency in selection. But there's clearly some others where I think they do want to move certain players on, irrespective of the fact they've bought 100 players. So look, I think it's a bit of a mess, to be honest with you. I expected more, even at this early stage. I expected more cohesion. I didn't expect them to have a goal difference of zero and losing to some of the teams that they do. Again, when you watch Chelsea, you can see a little bit of the offensive style, but there's still no real conviction in their play in terms of that clinical nature that you need. So I would worry for them in terms of this season. And look, they're a club that tends to. I think for the sake of their reputation, I hope they keep him. But I do agree with you to some extent. Don't keep him for the sake of keeping him in the sense that if you think he's not your man, I mean, as bizarre as it sounds, because that's removing all responsibility from the Chelsea hierarchy when they appointed him in the first place. But I agree, you don't just stick with a man just for the sake of sticking with him. But I think they've bought in a big name manager, so they do have to you give him some time and empower him to make the decisions if they believe he's their man. And that's what they did believe 4 or 5 months ago when they brought him in. So I think he has to get this season. Don't get relegated. That would be point number one. I know Chelsea fans will laugh thinking that shouldn't be the height of our ambition. But I think if you want to build something sustainable in year 2, year 3, I think perhaps that's the way it's going to have to be. But you're right, they need a massive upturn in terms of performance. They look shaky. They look so shaky at the back. Look at the goals they conceded. I mean, Calvert-Lewin going through, it's ricocheting, empty nets. I mean, these are a shambles. One from a set piece from Dobbin. I mean, it's not good, is it? I mean, they had lots of possession, 72%, dominating the game for the most part with the ball, but ultimately comes down to that old adage. It's about putting the ball in the back of the net, and that's something Chelsea, more than any other club, just don't do well enough.
Absolutely. But right, that's enough of managers under pressure. Let's briefly talk about a manager who's not under pressure before we actually speak about Arsenal and Villa. Klopp. But what I don't want to do is talk too much about Klopp. I want to talk about the game, or there was a specific incident in the game which affected the way that the game eventually panned out. There was a penalty. First, I'm going to talk about the penalty that was given. And it took about 4 minutes before decision was given. So that's that perennial old chestnut that we always talk about, VAR, or at least those sort of responsible for VAR, and then the sending off. But first, the penalty. What on earth? I still can't get my head around why it took. Was it 3 minutes, 4 minutes before VAR suddenly decided? Yeah, I think it is a penalty, because I saw it once and it was a penalty, albeit it was a very soft penalty. It was a penalty. So
yeah, I think that you're talking about the one that was obviously awarded for the Palace opener, right?
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. When Mateta was fouled by Kwanzaa. You know me, you high threshold for a penalty, but that one probably wasn't what we call a modern day penalty, right? Is it a foul? Yeah. It is. Was the Enzo Fernandez one on Anthony the other day a foul? Yeah, perhaps, but for me, it's got to be. I mean, the problem Kwanzaa had is there was a little bit of a backlift. He's obviously not seen Mateta, right? And he's kind of followed through a little bit. So it's unfortunate on the young centre back who's trying to make his way in that kind of team, and he's got an opportunity, to be fair, with Matip's injury. So he just hasn't seen him, as he's been a bit blindsided, and he's swung, and he's probably caught him on the back of the ankle, kind of on the underneath side. I mean, look. Yeah, look, it's a foul. I would have been happy either way, but I can see why. I mean, the players got the ball and then he's been kicked through. So I think the challenge they had was the game continued. You had the commentator speak about the fact that they're still checking, and now they're checking some of the surrounding situations about offside. Now, once they move to the offside situation, you know they've already confirmed it's a foul in the first place. They're now just looking to see if any offside situations might render the whole situation moot, right? So I agree. It probably shouldn't have taken that long, but I'm not going to hold them too far accountable for that. I always believe in getting to the right call. If it takes a bit extra time, so be it. But get to the right call. We saw the incident earlier this season at Spurs against Liverpool. If there was a bit more time taken and a bit more care taken, that error wouldn't have occurred. So if we now need to kind of show a lot more overcorrectness, so to speak, in all situations, taking an extra 20, 30 seconds, although in this case, 4 minutes or whatever it was, so be it. I agree. Probably not the most efficient evaluation. Did they come to the right call? Probably just.
I thought it was ridiculous. I think it's an embarrassment. It really is. I mean, it's been just when you think it can't get any more embarrassing, then it does, because it was clear. Obviously, the challenge was, and you're obviously saying that they were checking for other things. I mean, I just don't buy that. I think it's a game where we've introduced a system, but unfortunately, the people administering the system are just so incompetent that they're making an absolute mockery of a system that was introduced.
Yeah, the only thing I would say to that incident is, and this is my view on those kind of incidents generally, is that is Mateta going to be able to fashion any type of goal scoring opportunity from where he was? And the answer is no. So I just
But
don't
that's a
like.
different argument. That's a different argument altogether.
I agree. I agree. I'm just
Yeah.
saying it's just there's nothing that's going to come of it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Sorry.
right. But just on the second, and there was another challenge, which obviously this was the key one in terms of affecting the dynamics of the game. There are a number of people that I've spoken to who were just absolutely outraged that it was given as a second yellow for Ayew. My thoughts are it was absolutely a yellow, but I've got a reason for it. What were your thoughts? Was it a deserving second yellow?
I think Ayu has a bit of responsibility himself. He got the first yellow from, if you remember, preventing Virgil van Dijk from taking the free kick, or he stood over the ball. Van Dijk's probably then kind of provoked the situation by running up and kicking it against him. But to be fair, as a player, defensive player, you've probably got to retreat, right? You know players are going to do that. You can't just stand over the ball. A player's going to come and kick it against you and force the yellow card. That is exactly what happened. Once you're on the yellow, you've got to have some responsibility yourself, right, in terms of managing that situation. So, given that, I think he has to be very careful. Similarly, the Crystal Palace manager has to be careful. Look, we're 1-0 up. We're going to be under a lot of pressure moving into the last 20, 25 minutes. I've got a player who's on a yellow card who's given me everything for 60, 65 minutes. Maybe this would be a good time to take me off. I question, for example, why Ten Hag might not have taken Fernandes off on Saturday. I've not looked at the substitution patterns, but in a game where you know you've got a captain who's fairly petulant at the best of times, and he then picks up a yellow for dissent and gets himself booked and suspended for the Anfield game. I mean, I've tried to protect the player myself, right? That would be good management, you would say. So look, I think Andre Ayew has a responsibility himself to prevent getting caught in any niggly situations. I'm going to put it like that. Do I think it was did I think he was deliberately stopping a counter-attacking situation? No, that's my own assessment of it. So what I mean is he's not grabbed him or just clipped his heels for the sake of clipping his heels. What I mean is it's not a deliberate action, in my interpretation, to stop a counter-attacking situation. Bit similar to what you saw yesterday. I don't know if you saw the game where Lascelles was grabbing onto one of the Spurs
Yeah.
players. That was clear and obvious. He's trying to stop a counter-attacking situation. So I don't think it was an intentional foul, is what I'm trying to say. That's the first thing. That doesn't mean it can't be yellow. Accidental fouls are also yellow cards. I just think that was one that a referee could and should, in my opinion, let him get away with it. And what I mean by that is because it's not an intentional trip, because I think it's a foul. Not all fouls are yellows. I think he could have said, "You're on your last warning here. That was a trip." Do I think it was a counter-attacking situation? He was running slightly towards the byline a little bit, if that makes sense. And there were still a lot of players in good position. So I think it was a little unfortunate. Again, as a player, there's some responsibility on you as well not to put yourself in that position. But I thought the referee, there is some responsibility to try and keep it 11v11. Don't go overboard trying to keep it 11v11. Don't be turning a blind eye to nonsense. I think that's one he could have perhaps let him get away with.
I think it was It was as obvious as they will ever come. Not because of the challenge. If that challenge was the only reason why I say it was such an obvious one is that there was a counter. There was Gomez who was running, and and that's
Yep.
where I always say that if you are making a challenge, even if it's an innocent challenge, but it happens to foul a player, and there's a counter, then it has to be a card. So for that reason, absolutely correct. Both
So,
decisions were
yes,
right.
so we're aligned that it was an innocent trip. I think where you and I disagree is you say it could have been a threatening situation.
Absolutely, I think it was. I mean, Gomez, if you saw Gomez, Gomez was running in quite uh there was acres of space. So certainly it was an opportunity. So I think in that respect, absolutely no problem. I have got a Liverpool bias, but this is unbiased. It really, if it was the other way around, I would have still said the same. Just a quick one, I will say on the goal. Elliott's winning goal, unbelievable. It was just pure quality. And the reason why I say that is I love players when before they receive the ball, they're just having a look around, just gauging exactly where they are, what space they have, where the next or where the opposition is. And he just did that, feint to the shoulder, pass, beautiful finish. So excellent way to finish the game, and I was absolutely delighted. Right, that's enough about Liverpool. We're going to go on to your beloved Arsenal, who, my goodness me, they got beat.
Unfortunately so, and if you remember when we did our predictions, I said I'll take a draw. So
Hmm.
you can tell how I was approaching the game. Just one more thing on that, Elliot. I don't know if you saw the celebration that he had, a kind of a Dragon Ball Z celebration. I'd encourage anyone to watch it. I love it when players get creative with their celebrations. It's something that's missing out of this game. You'll remember famously the was it Neil Ruddock and Ian Wright? You'll remember when they created that referee being pushed over by
Oh
Paolo
yeah,
Di
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Canio. So,
yeah.
so
Those I like. I'm not taking on this stupid dancing some of these players do, but that I like because that's creativity, real creativity. Yeah.
yeah, true, true, agree. And you need those characters. I think Ian Wright's probably one of those. But no, it was a good celebration from Harvey Elliott as well. But yeah, I mean, going to Arsenal, yeah, a difficult one. Also full of a few controversial
Mm.
moments as well. First things first, huge credit to Aston Villa. Look, back-to-back wins against the two teams that are hoping to be fighting for the Premier League title. Two clean sheets, two 1-0 wins. And to be fair, it was a performance that was very consistent with what Aston Villa are doing this season. Lots of quality, lots of endeavour, lots of an efficient high defensive line, which worked again pretty much to a T. Arsenal did get in behind a few times, to be fair, but they didn't take advantage of those opportunities. But give massive credit to Aston Villa. Are they in the Premier League title race? Let's see. I mean, they've definitely got themselves right in there, and you are who you are at this stage. If you've got the points, which they have, I give them huge, huge credit. So, massive kudos to Unai Emery and Aston Villa. Ultimately, the game's about scoring goals and not conceding goals, and they managed to do that. So, big props. I think from an Arsenal perspective, Ayub, what I would say is first, it was a good performance from Arsenal. I don't really have too many qualms. I don't know if you watched the game. I try and be objective in my critique. If they've not played well against Luton, I thought they were average, to be fair, and they were fortunate to win. Perhaps the discrepancy in talent allowed them to nick it right at the end, although it took a 97th minute winner. But I thought they were pretty much the better team against Aston Villa. I thought they were, I wouldn't say dominant, but I did feel like they were much the better team compared to the two. But again, if you're going to concede early doors, that's the challenge. I did text one of my friends, Arsenal supporting friends, just before the game that it's imperative that Gabriel and Saliba engage Leon Bailey and Watkins. And that's exactly how the goal came because I've seen Gabriel do this a few times where you let the player come into the box, come into the box. You saw it yesterday with Son and Trippier. If you don't engage outside and you get backpedaling,
Mm.
it's normally good players, the tricky ones, will manage to get a yard, half a yard. So you've got to engage. He didn't give Villa credit, put a nice little move together. But Arsenal, to be fair, played really well. Knocked it around, got into the game. I guess the good thing about conceding early is you've got plenty of time, and they had lots of good opportunities. I mean, the best one probably in the first half, that Odegaard one, he's got to score. It's
Yeah.
fairly obvious. You're that close in. Any type of air on that shot, it's going in. He's probably just choreographed it way too much, and Martinez pulls off a good save, but he's got to score that. And Arsenal, for the most part, I thought did perform fairly well, just not as clinical as they need to be, right? They also had a penalty incident very similar, to be fair, to the Mateta incident, in fairness, in terms of it being kicked. Again, I have a high threshold. I thought the Mateta one was a judgment call, let's say, but to have the Jesus one not being given in a very similar fashion, the kick underneath, and he's probably racing more towards goal than even Mateta was. So I think I'd like to hear your views on that one. And then, yeah, right at the end, you've got that big incident. And look, ultimately, I want to be very kind of careful. You win with grace, you lose with grace. It is what it is. But I was really disappointed that a goal wasn't allowed to count. And I'll tell you why, if I can just kind of relay, is just because, you've got this. Some might say, "Oh, it's the rule." So what can you say? It's the rule that you've got to have an issue with. And my view is this, right? Again, a defensive player can have an accidental handball and get away with it. An offensive player can have an accidental handball and he can't get away with it if he's the player who scores. So you've got this imbalance between the offense and the defense, right? Or the attacking team and the defending team, which is unusual because the idea is to try and create more goal situations, right? You don't want goals choked off. That's the whole essence of entertainment, right? But you want it to be fair. So the fact is, Matty Cash, I think most would accept, has handballed the ball first, right? I think that's fairly obvious, right? He's handballed it. Do I think it was a handball? Probably not, because his arm's fairly close to his body. But was that ball heading in? Yes. Did Matty Cash's arm prevent that ball from going in? Yes. So what you've got is two players where it's, to be fair, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but it's pinball, right? There's not a yard between them. It's half a yard. There's a chest, there's a lap, there's a thigh, there's a top of the arm. There's all sorts of manner of touches between the two players. It's an absolute scramble, right, within a yard of the line, and then Havertz scores. Now, you might say I'm Arsenal biased, but I'll try and be fair with this evaluation. I couldn't see, in amongst all the camera angles, something clear and conclusive that it hit Havertz's hand. We can zoom in and say, oh, that's exactly where it was. But that's very difficult to evaluate. Was that his hand? Was that just the top of his thigh? What was it? It's very difficult. You remember when Arsenal were unfortunate against Newcastle, where there was no clear and conclusive evidence that the ball crossed the line in terms of Willock retrieving the ball. There was no clear and conclusive. They evaluated that Joe Linton's push wasn't a clear push, when I think most accept now that was a push that should have had led that goal. And there was no clear and conclusive evidence that it was offside against Gordon. So they just erred on the side of caution and gave the goal. My view is, irrespective of whether the referee's given the decision, because he gave the decision first, we've seen umpteen incidents this relatively recently, Ayub. Fernandez is the United penalty against Chelsea being one of them, where the incident has been re-refereed, right? So you can't say, well, once the referee's given it, you've got to find clear and obvious error. They keep using this clear and obvious, but I have seen so many recent incidents that have suggested that incidents are being re-refereed. I've got many an example. So look, could I see something clear that suggested that ball hit Havertz's hand? To me, subjectively, no, I couldn't. So from that perspective, I'm of the opinion, if I can't tell something conclusive and the ball's bouncing around between the two of them, I'm going to err on the side of caution and say, do I see something clearly that should prevent this goal from being allowed? And I couldn't see it myself. Now, you might have a different view. So for me, that was a bit of a disappointing thing. Having said that, Arsenal still have themselves to blame. They had plenty of opportunities, plenty of situations where they should have taken advantage of the high line. They couldn't quite work it out. I think they'll be fine. I think they've got a difficult game now ahead of Brighton. The two games they've lost this season, I could argue, probably a draw was the fair result. I think even against Villa, I could argue actually Arsenal were probably the better team. I couldn't say that against Newcastle, but it puts them in a slightly difficult spot. Home to Brighton next. Brighton have played very well at the Emirates recently. They then go to Anfield, so they've got to be careful now because suddenly things can slip away very quickly. But on the whole, I've not got too many issues with Arsenal performance. I thought it was a fairly solid performance. I thought Saliba did a great job on Watkins, but they'll be disappointed that they've not scored when they created ample opportunities to do so.
I agree. I mean, I was actually at the wedding, so I was actually watching the game on my phone. And you're absolutely right. If you were an Arsenal fan, there's no reason to be disappointed. It's one of those results that I think on any other given day, Arsenal would have won that game. I think they were the better side, albeit you could turn around and say, well, once Aston Villa had the lead, maybe they were a little bit more conservative. But certainly, I think Arsenal are playing good football. They're playing together as a team. There's lots of cohesion. Arteta has a plan, a strategy, and you could always sort of see that. That's a team that's very well coached, very well organized, very well managed, and it's a result that, as I said, it's 9 times out of 10, Arsenal would have not lost that game. That was just that one occasion where, uh, fair play to Aston Villa. They're playing well. They're playing really, really well, and they managed the game beautifully. I mean, I thought McGinn was magnificent. I mean, he's a underrated player. I think most players in the professional game probably rate him, but I think he's one that, when talking about good players in the Premier League, it's seldom that people talk about McGinn. But he's a fantastic player. He's combative. He gives it everything, and he's he's his skill level is underrated. He's not. He's got quite decent feet, quite tidy feet. He can sort of. He's not a player who's going to glide past the opposition, but he's got enough skill to be worthy of a Premier League player. And I think he's somebody that you always rely on, and he gives you everything. And he's the heartbeat of Aston Villa. So I thought it was a good game to watch, and I thought Arsenal were more than tidy, more than efficient, and I think at least a draw they deserved, at least a draw. So, but it gives, I suppose, that little bit of breathing space now for Liverpool in terms of, I think, what is it, 1 point between them two now, is it?
It is. It is indeed. And I think one more additional kind of compliment to Aston Villa. I thought you mentioned it right there, and you're right. They managed the game very well, and I think what Unai Emery did very well is, as Arsenal were in the ascendancy, very much in the ascendancy, Villa were flagging a little physically, and he made some really good changes just at the right time. He made the smart decision to bring a substitution on at half time, which meant he had 3 more substitution intervals, if that makes sense, in the second half. So he was just smart in terms of when he brought the players on, just to kind of arrest that slide. Because again, the players were flagging a little bit. If you remember, Arsenal had 1 more extra day of recovery than Villa did, who played Man City on Wednesday, and they put a lot into that game, didn't they? So
Yeah.
I think that's where Villa probably had a bit of a bench to bring on, or players off the bench to bring on. And I think this was perhaps, and this is what we talk about, right, where games come a little bit thick and fast. We saw it yesterday with Newcastle struggling physically massively, having to play so many games with the same players. I think this is where Arsenal's, some of their injuries, in my humble opinion, came just a little bit to bite them, where they couldn't quite affect the game off the bench. You think about Tommy Asu not being available right now because of injury. He'd have probably played in this game, I think, given Villa's offensive threat. But Tommy Asu, Partey, Partey's not played. Obviously, Timber's not played. So they've had a lot of critical injuries where they would have been able to just kind of use that off the bench, which obviously wasn't the case this week. He brought Trossard on for Martinelli. I thought that was a slight strategic error. I think Martinelli's pace was something you've got to keep on. But again, you're right. I was disappointed in the result, but ultimately the team, to be fair, played fairly well. It's just a case of you've got to be a bit more clinical and a bit more ruthless. So great to Villa. Got to score goals. Arsenal, they'll go back to the drawing board.
I don't think they'll go back to the drawing board. I think they're doing all right.
What I mean by drawing board is it puts a bit of pressure on in the Brighton game, because look, you don't want to. Brighton historically have done well at the Emirates, and you've got a visit to Anfield there afterwards. So you'd have to back Liverpool to beat Man United in the current form that both clubs are in. So I'm just saying it puts a little bit of pressure on Arsenal in terms of home to Brighton. Whereas if they, let's say, got a draw at Villa, you'd say even a draw at Brighton is not at home to Brighton. You've got to win your home games, I know, but it just keeps some momentum going. I think a defeat means you've probably got to win your next game just to recover. So let's see, puts a bit of pressure on.
Right. I mean, that's our major sort of roundup of all the major games. But obviously there were other games as well. But we've gone on for about an hour or so we don't want to take too much time. But is there any other comments you'd like to make on some of the other games? Is there anything that caught your eye?
What caught my eye was my must-have FPL pick, Heung-min Son, who you ridiculed because you were saying he'd be injured. And to be fair,
I was told he was injured.
To be fair, your sources. I mean, there was that picture of him on the bench, if you remember, wincing in pain after the last game. But I did fancy him a lot against Newcastle, a fatigued Newcastle, and 2 assists and a goal. So I'll take that one. That was the game. I mean, for me, big credit to Spurs. They played fantastic, dominant. Honestly, really enjoyable to watch. I really enjoyed watching Spurs yesterday on the front foot, trying to create. And other than maybe 15 minutes at the start of that second half where Newcastle were in the ascendancy before Richarlison's second. I mean, that game could have been anything. That should have been probably something like 8-2 or something along those lines, genuinely. But really thoroughly enjoyed watching Spurs. They're a fun team to watch. They're a good team. They're an exciting team to watch. I love different styles, and they needed that win, didn't they? Obviously, off the back of some disappointing results. So that one for me, well-deserved win for Ange and Spurs. And again, I love it when teams are expressing themselves and playing good football. And the difference between this game and maybe others where, and even Newcastle had some opportunities, the great chance at the start, right, with Anthony Gordon and a great clearance, I think, from Davis. But it's that they comfortably deserve to win the game. And I think when that's the case and you're on the front foot, they probably just need to be a little bit more clinical. But no, a real fun team to watch. And I thought they were brilliant, to be honest. Newcastle struggling physically massively. Massively. I don't know how much they've got left in the tank for this Champions League game week 6, but they look a team that's short right now in terms of physical capabilities. They need some players back quick and sharp.
You're absolutely right. They were really, really leggy. But you were right about Son. Unbelievable, magnificent. He was just such a star, such a standout player, and he really was. And he's a great player against good teams, but when you're playing against a team that's leggy, that's tired, that's fatigued, oh my goodness me, he's going to rip you apart, and exactly what he did. So really excellent, good shout. I mean, I was convinced that he wasn't going to play, which is why I sort of ridiculed you. And my pick of Haaland.
I'll let you off.
Yeah, let's not even go there. All right, okay. So that's our roundup. So before we sign off, let me ask you to do the usual thing. Subscribe if you haven't. Smash a like. Share with your friends. Join our Twitter account, or X account as it's known as now. And as always, thank you for viewing. And we'll see you very, very soon. So from Paris or Sergi, I bid you a fond farewell. Au revoir.